The next speaker is Roly Owers, who's going to present a discussion on what are the ethical and welfare implications of permitting the use of NSAIDs during competition. Roly qualified as a veterinarian from Cambridge University in 1992 and acquired his master's degree in nutrition from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in 1997. He briefly worked for the Blue Cross Animal Charity before joining the Royal Army Veterinary Corps for a 7-year period. In 1999, Roly joined the International League for the Protection of Horses, ILPH, with his primary focus being on fundraising. In 2003, he moved across to become Development Director of the Perth School in Cambridge before returning to ILPH as Chief Executive in January 2008. World Health Welfare is an 11 million plus charity which currently operates in the UK, across mainland Europe, Africa, and Central America. Roly is also a council member of the British Equine Veterinary Association, is part of the UK Government Industry Joint Working Group on African Horse Sickness, and attends meetings of the European Horse Network. Thanks, Roly.
Chairman, thank you very much. Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really very grateful for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon on a topic of what are the ethical and welfare implications of permitting non-steroidal during competition. It's been an end of a long afternoon session, but this is a really important debate, and I congratulate the FEI on organising this Congress to allow all points of view to be aired, because it is essential that national federations fully understand what they will be voting on and what the implications are for the vote in November of permitting the use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs during competitions. Now, this debate involves a number of overlapping issues, ethics and welfare being two of them. Therefore, I'll look to concentrate on ethics and welfare in the main, but I'll also look to touch on other related issues, such as the image of horse sport and the global role of the FEI. So, no graphs, no equations, because it's me, not very many long words, but I hope a lot of food for thought as we build towards the General Assembly this November. So why have I been asked to speak at this Congress about ethics and welfare? It's a question I've asked myself many times over the past few weeks. But I do so as Chief Executive of World Horse Welfare. And we're an international horse charity, previously known as the ILPH, whose guiding philosophy is to combine a passionate with practical approach to horse welfare. Now, this practical approach is clearly illustrated in our support of the use of horses in sport and leisure, provided that approved standards are met. We believe that the legitimate use of horses in this way is right, and that such use benefits horse welfare because of the investment that flows into the horse industry as a result. Now, this approach sets us apart from other horse welfare organisations. As well as being a horse welfare charity that supports horses in sport, we're also an organisation that's had a long association with the FEI that dates back nearly 30 years. This relationship has developed over the years, from our annual presentation to the General Assembly, which still occurs today, to being known as the welfare arm of the FEI, through the joint FEI World Horse Welfare Subcommittee, which was in existence from 2003 to 2008, to becoming an associate member of the FEI last year. Hence, I feel my role today is to provide a brief, practical viewpoint from the welfare perspective of allowing the use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs in FEI competitions. And I do so on behalf of World Horse Welfare, an international organisation and horse charity that's had a long and fruitful association with the FEI. Now, as already been touched on today, the benchmark for horse welfare within the FEI is the Code of Conduct. The code came about after the Stockholm World Equestrian Games in 1990 and was ratified by the General Assembly in Japan the following year. The code was subsequently published jointly by the FEI and World Horse Welfare, distributed to all national federations, and the original English version has now been translated into Arabic, French, Spanish, and German. The code has since been updated on at least 2 occasions, and it outlines the basic welfare objectives of all those who play a part in horse sport. Now, the FEI requires national federations and all those with an involvement in horse sport to adhere to the code. And it insists that all times the welfare of the horse must be paramount and must never be subordinated to competitive or commercial influences. Now, the code is made up of 5 sections: preparation and training, fitness to compete, the event, injuries and retirement, and education. And I would like just to focus very briefly on 2 particular parts of the code that I think are especially relevant to this meeting and this debate. Firstly, education. Section 5 of the code states and urges all those involved in equestrian sport to attain the highest possible levels of education in their areas of expertise relevant to the care and management of the competition horse. Education is fundamental to this debate. This Congress is a vital stepping stone in educating national federations on the welfare implications of allowing the use of non-steroidals in FEI competition. Equally important, though, is the education of all the stakeholder groups involved in horse sport. Today is just the start. And secondly, and this probably goes to the core of our debate, fitness and health status to compete. The first 2 paragraphs of Section 2 of the Code state, participation in competition must be restricted to fit horses and riders of proven competence. And secondly, no horse showing symptoms of disease, lameness, or other significant ailments or pre-existing clinical conditions should compete or continue to compete when to do so would compromise its welfare. Focusing on this further, must be restricted to fit horses, and no horses showing signs of lameness should compete. This poses a simple philosophical question. Should a horse that requires treating with non-steroidals to be fit or to alleviate signs of lameness compete in FEI competition? This query also goes to the heart of the ethical aspect of this debate, which I will return to in just a moment. If your answer to the above question is no, which would appear to be in line with the code, then you have reached your decision on this whole matter. However, if it is a yes or a don't know, then you need to consider what if. What if non-steroidals are allowed in FEI competition? What would the welfare implications be for such a move? They could be profound, which is why our discussions at this Congress today are so important. Now, I do recognise that non-steroidals are used in competition in some areas of the world, so what can science tell us about such use? We've clearly heard a lot about that today. Clinical studies may help national federations consider whether an extension to allowing non-steroidals internationally is a good idea. But as ever, research findings are not always clear-cut and are often open to at least some degree of interpretation. Moreover, let us not forget that those countries that prohibit, on welfare grounds, the medication of competition animals through national legislation. We have to understand why these governments decided to ban such medication. Such decisions were not made lightly, and only after considerable public debate. But the overriding need to protect the animal must have been at the forefront of their thinking. Should a sports federation ignore such legislation? Indeed, can it? As a horse welfare organisation, we do not slavishly believe in the zero option. Clearly, if research indicates that through judicious use of phenylbutazone, for example, the competition life of a horse is lengthened without other significant implications, then that would certainly be worthy of closer consideration. However, if the research indicates that the use of phenylbutazone at level considered in last year's progressive list or less leads to a significant increase in catastrophic injury of the horses, then we simply cannot allow its use. Within FEI sport, we obviously have a variety of disciplines, and therefore we also need to look closely at the welfare implications for allowing non-steroidals on each of these areas. For example, we need to understand the welfare implications of the effect of non-steroidals in stressed animals, such as on kidney function in endurance horses, before we ever allowed their use in international sport. We have to ensure that we are as informed as we can be by the findings of the research, and having considered this need, at least in part, to base our decisions on these findings. However, I would urge you to err on the side of caution in coming to any conclusion. Yes, we need to base our decision on the facts, as far as they can be clarified, but the implications of our decision could be enormous. So why permit the use of non-steroidals in competition? There are a variety of reasons put forward. We have heard some already today, and some of these do have a welfare basis. I'm sure this is not a comprehensive list, but such reasons do include reducing the number of positive dope cases in competitions, helping manage the workload of a competition horse, ensuring that all medication administration is brought into the public domain. Horses may suffer less if such medication is allowed. In areas of the world where welfare and treatment standards are poor, this might encourage legitimate therapy, and it might open the door for regular dope testing of horses in training as well as in competition. However, I would urge you, for whatever reason or reasons you put forward as the basis for allowing the use of non-steroidals, that you fully test them against the FEI Code of Conduct and the available research. I would also caution against justifying the use of non-steroidals on reasons of convenience. By way of illustration, I would suggest that a justification that will reduce the number of positive dope tests in competition is just that. Surely there are more appropriate and proportionate ways of achieving a reduction in dope cases. The whole Clean Sport initiative should be fundamental in achieving just that outcome. Now, the FEI is the global body of horse sport. It is the pinnacle and is, or certainly should be, the body for which millions of riders around the world who compete in non-FEI competition take their lead. We know that non-steroidals are used in a number of horse disciplines outside FEI competition in a number of countries around the world. Hence, I'm certainly not naive enough to think that if we have a clean sport in FEI, then all is well with competition horse welfare. However, if a decision is taken in November to allow the use of non-steroidals in FEI competition, then there must be a danger that then some of these riders around the world will think, well, if it is all right for the FEI, then it must be all right for me. And the reality is that many of these riders will not have the support and input from a veterinarian, which could in itself lead to serious welfare implications. I would urge you not to underestimate what sports riders outside the FEI will conclude from the vote in November. Now, clearly, the image of our sport, it is critical. It is critical to our sponsors, who invest millions of dollars in it every year. It is critical to the riders and everyone directly involved in the sport. For many, it is their life living. And of course, it is critical to the general public, who are the grassroots of our sport. The FEI made a significant decision back in the 1990s to place phenylbutazone on the list of prohibited substances. Since that time, the public's perception of welfare, as opposed to the scientist's perspective, has changed significantly. I certainly do not believe in mob rule, but nevertheless, the challenge that the sport faces from the public's perception of horse welfare is immense. The recent furore surrounding hyperflexion is but one example. The FEI must certainly not be ruled by what the growing number of social media hubs are demanding, but cannot ignore what is being said either. Clearly, a militant few are determined to stop horse sport altogether. But I do believe that the vast majority of the public are well-intentioned, are listening like a jury, and wish to act and wish us to act in the best interest of the horse. But please do not forget that the final decision, this debate today, will not escape the notice of a number of animal welfare charities and campaigning organisations around the world and their millions of supporters and followers. It is therefore all the more important to justify beyond reasonable doubt any decision to allow non-steroidals again in FEI competition. If the General Assembly were to take this step this November, the reasons would have to be clearly explained to the general public why this is in the interest of the horse. This would be an immense task and quite possibly impossible. Like it or not, we need to take a view on what the public will accept, and the use of non-steroidals in competition may well be a step too far. Finally, I want to say a few words about the ethical implications of what we are considering today. Firstly, what do I mean by ethics? I'm not referring here to animal rights, but to the moral relevance of an animal's welfare and our duty as individuals who have animals in our care. As I've already said, World Horse Welfare believes that a strong ethical case can be made for the caring and conscientious use of horses in sport. But this places a significant responsibility on us to make sure that we place horse welfare above all other pressures and demands. To decide what is the right ethical decision, we might, for example, carry out a cost-benefit analysis. Do the obvious benefits to the rider through giving non-steroidals outweigh costs to the horse in terms of potential injury or aggravating a disorder? There are two relevant, if uncomfortable, questions that are raised out of that. Firstly, is it morally right in a competition that should be run under fair and equal conditions for a fit horse in its prime to be beaten by one that is being propped up by pharmacology? Secondly, is it morally right for a horse to be given bute to pass a horse inspection? The ethical challenge is to ask ourselves what is the right approach to take, bearing in mind our social and moral values, and face up to the morally correct answers. And let us not fall into the trap of being anthropomorphic, but equally let us always remember that the horse does not have a choice whether or not to compete in horse sport. We make that decision, and we have a duty to ensure that the way in which we use horses in sport is ethically correct. Can we just say, because humans use paracetamol or brufen to treat a headache or menstrual pain, it is right or appropriate to give non-steroidals to resolve a lameness? Put simply, humans decide what drugs to take, horses do not. Now, I do appreciate the overwhelming majority of people involved in horse sport have a deep and intimate relationship with their animals and have a profound concern for their welfare. However, as in all sports, there'll always be a small number that will do what they can to win at any cost. We must not provide them with this opportunity. We have to send out a clear signal that horse sport is not only justified ethically, but that welfare of the horse remains an absolute and non-negotiable priority. Over the past few minutes, I've tried to link together what I believe are the key issues relating to the ethical and welfare implications of permitting the use of non-steroidals in FEI competition. The short answer as to what these implications are is serious, and the ones that should be judged against the FEI Code of Conduct, which dictates the welfare of the horse must be paramount and must be never subordinated to competitive or commercial influences. There are a number of questions that national federations need to answer in advance of the General Assembly this November. And I would implore you all to give this your careful consideration over the next few months. The stakes are high, both for the FEI and horse sport globally. Now, as someone who competed at a very novice level, I know about the thrill of winning, and it is important to win, but not at any price. Let us never forget that there'll always be a winner, with or without hyperflexion, with or without the overuse of spurs and whips, and with or without non-steroidals. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. I hope that my words will help you in your important deliberations between now and November. And I'll leave you with one of my favourite Arabian proverbs, which is, "The breath of heaven is that which blows between a horse's ears." Thank you.